Buddhism is a world religion founded by the Buddha in ancient India. Buddhists seek wisdom, meaning, inner peace, and freedom from greed, hatred, and ignorance. Mutually sustaining life, a Buddhist call to a troubled world.
When the morning star appeared in the eastern sky, the struggle was over, and the Bodhisattva's mind was as clear and bright as the breaking day. He had, at last, found the path to enlightenment.
When Prince Siddhartha left the palace in search of truth, he went to study with various teachers. From this point on, he was no longer a prince, but rather became a bodhisattva, or in other words, a seeker of enlightenment. Despite these well-known teachers, he found none of their ways to be completely satisfactory. Instead, the bodhisattva joined other seekers to engage in severe ascetic practices. These austere practices were so demanding that his body became extremely emaciated, to the point where his arms and legs became so thin that they were like the jointed stems of a bamboo. Unfortunately, yet again, he was making no progress whatsoever, giving him no choice but to abandon this path. Hence, both the lives of the pleasures of the palace and the 6 years of ascetic life could not bring peace. The Bodhisattva then regained his physical strength by receiving an offering of milk and rice by a young woman named Sujata from a nearby village. Thereafter, the Bodhisattva sat under a pipal tree, which came to be called the Tree of Awakening, or Bodhi tree, and resolved not to leave the spot until he had realized the state of awakening. In the shade of the tree, he then settled into a state of deep meditative calm and peace. There are many accounts of what actually took place, but one that I find easy to understand and appreciate is explained in a story of the Bodhisattva's encounter with a figure called Mara. Mara means the bringer of death, and one that symbolizes our mental and emotional attachment. In this tale, Mara appears before the Bodhisattva with various temptations to get the Bodhisattva to give in to his greed, hatred, and ignorance. For example, Mara sends an army of demons to attack him with many kinds of weapons. However, the Bodhisattva perceives the demons and their weapons as representing the attachment of hatred and anger. Consequently, he did not react to them, and so the rain of weapons hurled at him by the demons turned into a rain of beautiful flowers. In this way, the Bodhisattva saw that people suffer because they let these attachments run wild and overwhelm them. Mara then approached the Bodhisattva directly to challenge him and asked, by what right he sat under the tree of awakening. The Bodhisattva replied that by the right of having practiced the spiritual path for a long time. Mara countered him by saying that he too had done the same. Besides which, he had all his armies to vouch for this fact. But who, he asked, could vouch for him? The Bodhisattva then lifted his right hand and touched the ground, calling on the very earth as witness in what has come to be known as the earth-touching gesture. This signaled Mara's defeat and the Bodhisattva's awakening as the Buddha. This is obviously not the whole story of the Buddha's awakening, but rather gives us a glimpse into the nature of that awakening, as described in today's opening passage. When the morning star appeared in the eastern sky, the struggle was over, and the Bodhisattva's mind was as clear and bright as the breaking day. He had at last found the path to enlightenment. He had become the awakened one, the Buddha. Once he decided to share what he had discovered, the Buddha met up with 5 fellow ascetics with whom he had trained together previously. At first, they shunned him, but the Buddha's demeanor and his words won them over as they heard the Buddha deliver his first sermon. Convinced by the truth of his awakening, they became the Buddha's first disciples. From there, the Buddha journeyed around the country sharing his teachings. His charisma and compassion led many to seek him as their teacher, and his number of disciples swelled. According to some accounts, his wife, Yashodhara, son, Rahula, stepmother, Mahaprajapati, and his father also became members of the Sangha, the order of monks and nuns. For the next 45 years, the Buddha wandered throughout the region to share, to teach, and to nurture. When he was 80 years old, he became deathly ill after eating some food offered by a layman. Lying between 2 large sala trees, he continued to teach until his last moments of life. As his disciples, lay supporters, and even the animals wept amid the sadness of the imminent death of their teacher, the Buddha spoke these famous words: "Make yourself the light. Rely upon yourself. Do not depend upon anyone else. Make my teachings your light." We are honored to have Reverend Jiho Sargent back with us again. Reverend Sargent, thanks for coming back. Good to have you back.
Pleasure.
You know, Buddhists have been accused of overemphasizing unsatisfactoriness and suffering. But I tell such critics that that's just the beginning. That's where you start from. What is important is where you end up, which is enlightenment and awakening. And so, you yourself, having become a priest in search of that awakening, what differences have been made in your life having been a priest?
Well, mostly I don't know the differences until afterwards. And life just seems to proceed more smoothly than it used to.
I see.
But perhaps that's from cutting attachments to concepts as well as cutting attachments to things like hair.
Like hair. Oh. So not just attachments to hair, but cutting attachments to concept. And, is there any kind of example you have of when you say cutting attachments to concepts? You know?
Well, one is my attachment to certain words. And it's much more relaxing for everyone else and for me when I let that attachment go some.
Yeah. So breaking attachment from concept is what Buddha taught, and that's what he did as he taught for 45 years of his life. And in so doing, there were women involved in that process. For example, his family members participated. Can you say something about the role of women in early Buddhism?
Well, the important thing, I think, is that there was a role for women in early Buddhism, and it was a role in both the home leavers and the householders sections of the Buddhist Sangha. We think now that Buddhism is something that doesn't exist for women, but that's not true, and there have been women in Buddhism, as we said, ever since the time of Shakyamuni Buddha himself.
And women have become enlightened. They reach the highest stages, haven't they?
Yes, there are records from India of both women and men who recorded their awakenings.
Yes. And speaking of women, there's another important woman in his life, who is Sujata, the young lady who provided milk rice when he left the mountain.
And then that gave him the strength to be able to awaken.
So, a related topic is how Buddha taught and how he got involved with people. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, we often seem to think of Buddhism as a rather passive thing, but Shakyamuni Buddha traveled extensively throughout the rest of his life and interacted with all kinds of people and taught them by both words and examples of his own way of life, so that this interaction with other people was a primary part of his teaching.
So often in the West, in the olden days, Buddhism was accused of being indifferent, withdrawn, but that's really not what it was in the beginning, nor even now.
That's true. Buddhism was very much involved with all kinds of beings from its start.
Well, unfortunately our time is up. It's been very informative and quite enjoyable the last two times, and I'd like to thank you for joining us.
And thank you.
The Buddha's life confirms that life at its core is fundamentally good. When we awaken to the true nature of life, we experience greater joy, gratitude, and a sense of oneness with others. We realize that we are part of the world and not separate from it. As I leave you with thoughts of oneness, allow me to close with a little humor. Well, a Buddhist monk wanted to buy a hot dog. So he walked over to a hot dog vendor on a busy street corner. The vendor asked, "What would you like, sir?" And the monk answered, "Make me one with everything." Well, hopefully you like that one. In the next two shows, we'll be looking at the images of the Buddha with a guest. Please be sure to join us.
We at Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai pursue peace and happiness for people around the world. We have published the Buddhist teachings into 41 languages and donated our publication to hotels and other facilities in 55 countries. We would like to share the Buddhist teachings with people around the world. That's our mission. Visit our website for more information